Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. I'm Carl Tischler, and I and my wife Suzanne have been members of this congregation for almost 20 years. I'm serving as chair of our financial stewardship team, and I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to be the pianist for today's service, which is usually done by our music director, Jerry Phelps. Our congregation has been designated a welcoming congregation by the Unitarian Universalist Association, which means we welcome all, regardless of age, race, disability, ethnicity, immigration status, sexual identity, religious background, or political affiliation, factors that can separate us in the larger culture. As the parent of a son with severe autism, I'm particularly grateful to this congregation for welcoming Andrew and other children with autism to participate in our services. Today's service will be led by our Director of Religious Education, Sierra Marie Garfio. I invite you to look at our announcements in the order of service, and one in particular. Please note that our annual auction is going to be held on Saturday, this coming Saturday, online, November 6th at 6 p.m. Online bidding is available now with the details listed in the order of service. So again, welcome to all in the spirit of compassion, inquiry, and service. And please join us in our hymn of welcome gathered here. If you are in person, we invite you to hum. And if you're in Zoom, sing as loudly or softly as you wish. Thank you.
Good morning. It is so good to be together. It is so good to be together on this drying out, crisp, almost crisp autumn day. Good Samhain for those of you who celebrate Samhain, and happy Halloween to those who celebrate Halloween. I want to invite you to allow yourself to come fully into the room now, if you haven't already, whether on Zoom room or in person. To the extent you are comfortable, give yourself a chance to settle in, to notice you are here. Here we are. Here we are, all of us breathing together in these moments that belong uniquely to this time and this event, even as we are together across distances. Here we are together, each of us held by the same gravitational force of belonging to this amazing earth that has given us this beautiful autumn day. Here we are. Our opening words this morning are by Robert French Levens. Holy and beautiful, the custom which brings us together in the presence of the Most High, to face our ideals, to remember our loved ones in absence, to give thanks, to make confession, to offer forgiveness, to be enlightened and to be strengthened. Through this quiet hour breathes the worship of ages, the cathedral music of history. 3 unseen guests attend: faith, hope, and love. Let our hearts prepare them place. Rick Cousins will light our chalice and lead us in the words of affirmation that are going to be on the screen.
Please join me in our chalice lighting affirmation as it appears on the screen. Love is the spirit of its congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another and celebrate life.
If there are children who are at home, who are in the room but not near the screen, I invite you to come on over now. And just a quick explanation for those of you who weren't at service last week, that the hand motions I use for the affirmation are a little different than the motions you used before the pandemic. You might not have noticed because we've been online. The motions I use are a little more accessible in terms of motor control, but if you're more comfortable with the old hand motions, by all means, use whatever makes you most comfortable. Let's say together our children's affirmation. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. I have a ghost story to tell this morning. This story came from a person named Harris Tobias, whose writings you can find online. I'm going to retell the story with a combination of my own words and those of Harris Tobias. Like plenty of other ghost stories, this story begins with a haunted house. This particular haunted house was in Blakesley, Arkansas. Now, sometimes a house being haunted is the surprise of a story, but not with this story. Because in Blakesley, Arkansas, am I pronouncing that right? Anybody from Arkansas? Do you know? It seems everyone knew the house was haunted. So picture this. This house, like most haunted houses in most ghost stories, was an old, abandoned, neglected house on a side street in the oldest part of town. And because it was a side street and no one lived at the house, maybe people didn't go by so much. But when they did, here's what they said happened. They said that the most wonderful smells came from this empty, old, neglected house where no one lived. The street filled with the heavenly odor of fresh baked bread. It would have been a delightful, comforting, inviting smell if it hadn't been so spooky. When people talked about the haunted house, they guessed that maybe it had been a bakery once, or at least that it had been the home of a fabulous baker. And sometimes, especially at night, the neighbors would hear music or laughter coming from the empty house, as if there was a party happening. Whatever ghosts haunted the old house, they seemed benign, friendly enough. But even the friendliest spirits sometimes give us quite a scare. So the music and the laughter, which in any other circumstance might have invited people in, kept everyone away. No one wanted to go near the old house, except children when they took up a dare to go in. But as soon as they entered, shivers would run down their spines, and they'd feel as if there were ghosts all around. And then they'd run out of the house as fast as they could. And that is how it was for many years, until one day, a family moved to town from not so close by. They were looking for a new home in their new town, noticed the empty house, and asked neighbors who owned it. The family learned that it hadn't had an owner for many years. They went to the town hall to find out more. It turned out that the last person who owned the house didn't leave it to anyone when they died and didn't have family for it to go to, and it became a property of the state. So this family that was new to town was able to buy the house by paying back taxes. But all this talk of who the house belonged to meant that no one took the time to figure out how to tell the family about the house's curious history. Fortunately, or unfortunately, they learned all about it soon after moving in. There were odd noises in the night. They caught glimpses of weird lights drifting from room to room. Smells of baking came from their cold kitchen. It became hard to sleep at night as they kept thinking they'd heard a party. Was a neighbor keeping them up? Nope. Outside it was dark and the houses around were quiet and still. It all became so disturbing that the mother took the children to stay somewhere else. She did not want to make a home for the children in a haunted house. Her partner soon followed. He too did not want to make a home for the children in a haunted house, nor did he want to sleep alone in one. The couple became angry. They were furious none of the neighbors had told them of the house's reputation. They were angry at the town board for letting them buy the house without one word about the stories of ghosts living there. They felt they'd been treated badly, that they'd been set up as strangers in the town to do something so foolish as buying a haunted house that no one else would come anywhere near. They went to the mayor to complain and see if they could get their money back. But the mayor said that he had never misrepresented the house as something that it wasn't, and he refused to help them. Just because the house is haunted, the mayor says, doesn't mean you can't live there. Why don't you try making friends with the ghosts? This didn't make the couple feel even a little bit better. They wondered why, if the mayor felt this way, he nor anyone else from town had tried to live in the house themselves. But since the couple couldn't get their money back, they knew that they and their children would have to return. Desperate, they went to talk to the pastor, the minister of the town church. The minister agreed to go to the house with the man to help him figure out what should be done. As they approached the house, the minister smelled a delicious smell. "What's that wonderful smell?" he asked. And the man told him, "That's the ghosts baking bread." When they got closer, the minister stopped to listen carefully. He asked, "Am I hearing music?" And the man told him, "It's the ghosts. They must love to have a party." The minister and the man went inside and looked at the empty house. The minister sat at a table while the man looked for something to serve his guest. He found an old bottle of whiskey and poured a glass for the minister and one for himself. They toasted each other's health and drank. "So you moved here from Little Rock? You moved from Little Rock to Blakesley?" "My parents live in Little Rock. I know the town well." The man, it turned out, knew some of the minister's relatives. They talked and joked about those things they had in common and felt a friendship growing. They were having such a pleasant time that before they knew it, 3 hours had passed. They were gone so long, the man's partner began to get nervous. "He and the minister went to the house hours ago," she said to herself. And the longer she waited, the more nervous she got. Finally, she couldn't bear waiting any longer. She called on the minister's partner, and they pulled their misgivings about ghosts and their worries about their partners and went to the haunted house together. When they got there, they nervously peeked in the windows and saw 2 men sitting at a table laughing and having a good time. They joined their partners at the table and found they had much to talk about. The laughing and talking attracted the neighbors who stopped by to chat. Pretty soon, the kitchen was filled with the smell of cooking. One neighbor brought her fiddle, and another brought her guitar, and just like that, there was a party. The old house filled with smells and music and laughter from people inside. It was alive again, and that perhaps had been what the ghosts wanted all along. From that day to this, the ghosts have rested. So ends the story. We're not all so different from the neighbors of Blakesley, with the choice to come into community, to move through any fear into belonging and care. We practice that here every Sunday. Each of us carries in our hearts great joys and deep sorrows, stories and milestones from our lives. Let us share these with one another in the moments to come. If you're online, you're invited to type those joys and sorrows, those milestones into the chat box. We'll reserve the chat in this time just for joys and sorrows, we hold the joys and sorrows of this community. I'll light a candle now for what has been spoken here and for what remains in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. In the time of silence to follow, I invite you, if you have forgotten, and if it serves you well to do so, to recall again that we are here together, held by forces of belonging, and settle into the connection. Oops, mine out. Let us hum or sing Spirit of Love. Our very brief reading this morning is from the book Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds by Adrienne Maree Brown. I'll share a little more from the book also during this morning's message. In the book, Adrienne describes herself as, quote, auntie, sister, daughter, woe, writer, facilitator, coach, mentor, pleasure activist, sci-fi scholar, doula, healer, tarot reader, witch, cheerleader, singer, philosopher, queer, Black, multiracial lover of life living in Detroit, end quote. She's currently writer in residence at the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute. I commend the book Emergent Strategy to you. Here's the reading. My paternal grandmother, Eloise Brown, died when I was 9. One of my clearest secret memories is that I saw her, impossibly, on a playground shortly before I learned of her death. As I get older, I think part of her came to me to be carried for a while. I have felt her with me so closely. So ends the reading. Rick will lead us in this morning's offering.
It is now time for our congregational offering. For those of us here for the first time, your presence here is your gift to us. Online members, please express your generosity by clicking the link posted in the chat to make a donation or pledge. While not everyone is here in our sacred space at this time, our operating expenses remain the same. Please consider using the Simple Give barcode or link, or feel free to mail a check here to UUCD, 24 Clapboard Ridge Road, here in Danbury. For those of us here in the fellowship hall, there will be someone at the door to collect offerings as you leave our service today. Please join me now in our congregational response. In the spirit of compassion and service, we dedicate these, our offerings.
There's choreography to return to as we come back together. I had to remember when to stand and when to sit and when to light the candles. Let me say in advance that all ends well in the real life story I'm about to tell. But it does involve a relatively minor childhood accident. Several years ago, I was babysitting a friend's 2 children, and we were playing with a dollhouse upstairs in the family's home. The children wanted to go downstairs for a snack, so we left the room and we headed across the hall to the stairs, which had a baby gate at the top and the bottom. I realized after we left the room that I had forgotten to turn off the light, so I quickly took 2 steps back, reached into the room with one arm, and turned it off, which left me a total of about 3 steps behind the children in the hallway. But where they typically waited for me at the baby gate, the older of the 2 children unlatched the opened gate just in a split second. And I called out in horror, "Wait, wait!" When the 2-year-old would go down the steps on any other day, I would make sure to go in front of her in case she slipped, which she almost never did. But on this occasion, when her older sister opened the gate, even as I told her to wait, the 2-year-old began to walk down the stairs without hesitation. I didn't want to knock her down by leaping onto the narrow staircase to get in front of her, so I tried to move quickly but gently. Yet just as I got my feet on the steps, she slipped in front of me. And I grabbed for her, but I wasn't able to catch her, as she was already falling quickly forward. Time felt like it was moving both in super speed and in slow motion. She tumbled down and rolled down every wooden stair on the steep wooden staircase of my friend's early 20th century home. In a flash, I was at the bottom of the stairs with her, holding her in my arms as she let out a scream, both terrifying and terrified. Her injuries included a scary-looking cut on her lip and bruised gums, but it turned out to be fairly minor. Fortunately, her father was home, working in his home office upstairs, and he was able to come comfort her right away. We checked her out, got her snuggled up with her sister, and iced her lip. A little later, she went to the doctor and checked out fine. But even as an adult who was a parent myself and had experience with children getting hurt, I was completely shaken by what happened. I ran it over and over again in my head, wishing I could go back and skip turning off the light and properly instruct the children when we left the room to wait for me at the gate rather than relying on their history of waiting. It took me a while to trust myself again as a caretaker of my friend's children. It took me a while not to feel shaky and slightly nauseated when we traveled up and down the stairs together. This kind of perseverative review of what happened, this kind of fear of the children getting hurt again, it served a purpose. It helped me keep the kids safer through increased vigilance and a greater emphasis on setting expectations together as we started new activities or ventured away from what we had been doing. It is possible, of course, that my fear could have become unhelpful, even harmful. If my fear had been overwhelming, misdirected, or especially long-lasting, in the absence of intervention, it could have made me so vigilant that I scared the children, that they lost trust in my ability to keep them safe by my nervousness. Or worse, they lost trust in their ability to do physically challenging things. It could have disrupted relationship, making me too afraid to babysit for my friend again. But fear in this case did what my brain designed it to do and no more. It increased safety, became a part of a story for me about what the children needed, and diminished as it was no longer helpful. Meanwhile, the children had their own experience of fear. They too replayed what happened again and again. They told the story to everyone they encountered, at the grocery store, wherever they were. They acted it out when they played. They repeated the story to their parents over and over for a few weeks, and to me whenever I was over there. And they asked us to repeat it to them, back to them. Through this repetition, they were able to develop a cohesive narrative or story, a sense of organization around what had only felt chaotic and frightening when it happened. The narrative about what happened became something like this. Remember when I had that really scary fall down the stairs and got hurt and I was crying? Remember you helped me feel better? Remember how the doctor said, "You're okay now." I'm okay now. I was hurt, now I'm okay. You took care of me. Daddy took care of me. My sister took care of me. I'm feeling better. I'm going to be all right. The narrative about the stairs became, sometimes people slip on the stairs. It can hurt a lot to fall. I'm still learning to use the stairs. I have to be extra careful. I have to wait for an adult to help me so that I don't fall very far if I slip. Remember when I slipped and fell far? I didn't like that, but I'm okay now. The creation of a narrative around the events that terrify us actually can prevent a long-term trauma response. In social work school, I learned a model for emotional first aid in the immediate aftermath of an acute traumatic event, any event that is associated with helplessness, terror, or catastrophe. The model, called the 6 C's model, was developed by Moshe Farchi as a response to conditions of global conflict and violence. The theory is that activating the cognitive regions of the brain in the first moments and hours after a traumatic event decreases activity of the limbic system, the fight, flight, or fawn part of the brain, which was originally activated for survival. And as the limbic system decreases activity, so too does our sense of helplessness decrease. And in turn, as cognition is activated, a coherent narrative of the event can be integrated so that the thoughts of the event don't remain chaotic and intrusive. So the method involves, if it's physically safe to do so, immediate activation of cognition through a physical action. Are you able to move over here to this safer location? There's some water over here. Can we walk over and get you some? It involves a cognitive securing of safety. Here's a safe place for us to stand while we wait for the medic. And it involves keeping cognition activated by the immediate, in-order sequencing of events, prompting someone to share what they remember about the before, during, and after of what happened, up to the resolution of the immediate threat to safety. The story gets repeated in sequenced order, filling in details as they are recalled. The listener can help keep it organized, even when not all the details have yet been remembered. So you don't remember where you were driving before the accident, but you remember that this light turned green, and you started to go through the intersection. You remember the blue car hit you on their passenger side. Your car stopped and you got out, and then I came over and we walked to the sidewalk so we would be safe from the other cars. Did I get that right? The fear starts to take its place in the story so that it does not keep reasserting itself in our experience beyond its usefulness. We can make meaning of the story that moves through and beyond that point of helplessness. It is wondrous to me that children so often do this so naturally, that their desire to repeat the story of what happened to them, to hear the story over and over, to act it out, to move through its sequence again and again, revisiting the fear, that's precisely the thing that keeps the fear from becoming overpowering. In this kind of scenario, we visit our fears so they don't overpower us. Outside of the context of an acute traumatic event, storytelling is still so often one of the ways we manage fear. One of my kids' originally planned Halloween costumes fell through this year, and they decided the easiest thing to pull together last minute with some face paint and a colorful suit they already had was a Joker costume from the Batman stories. I was intrigued that the Wikipedia page for Joker describes the representation of Joker this way. Quote, "The Joker embodies themes of chaos, anarchy, and obsession," end quote. Halloween is a cultural ritual in which we and our children might choose to embody a fear, to bring that fear to life in a physical way, playing it up, even activating our limbic systems on purpose, going to haunted houses and anticipating with horrified delight the jump scare that might take us down. At my own house, I have put out a welcome mat for vampires, ghosts, and monsters. I say welcome mat, and I mean that quite literally. I did put out the Halloween doormat on my porch a couple of weeks ago. And I've been so excited for today, hoping for as many visitors as might be possible. What an interesting cultural ritual we might think this is if we visited it again today, as if for the first time. The decorations and candies we use to make our homes inviting to visitors who dress up in any costumes they wish, including gory and frightening ones. And of course, this makes sense for the time of year associated from before our births with the coming dangers of cold and starvation. But this is also the time of year when many cultures, many religious traditions, believe the veil between worlds, between the living and dead, is thinner. Which is, I should stop here and say, not a frightening thing in most traditions, but a time of connection with the deceased, a time of love and peace, which we'll honor with our final hymn today. I've been wondering as I prepared this service, do the veils between all worlds thin at this time? If the veil is thin between the worlds of the living and dead, might also the veil be thin between the world we are in now and the world we are creating? What if we embrace Halloween's invitation to face our fears, but do so knowing we have the strength, wisdom, and love of our ancestors with us? Those people who have died before us, but who we call upon as ancestors because it is their legacy we wish to carry as we co-create the world that is becoming. What if we accepted the invitation to face our fears and we did so from a place of deep belonging? The belonging of legacy stewards who are carrying the unfinished work of ancestors into the future. But imaginatively and creatively face both those deeply personal fears of pain, inadequacy, aloneness, meaninglessness, illness, powerlessness, and loss, and those deeply personal fears that are rooted in contexts of oppression, including racism, ableism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, as well as economic oppressions that make some of us fearful that we won't be able to pay our medical bills, or keep the heat on, or put the next meal on the table. And those global fears of climate disaster, of war and destruction, of seemingly intractable, life-destroying forces. What if we went to battle our fears for the legacies we wish to carry into the world that is created in this moment, and this moment, and this moment, and so forever created? In the book from which our first reading came, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Maree Brown writes, quote, "It is so important that we fight for our future, get into the game, get dirty, get experimental. How do we create and proliferate a compelling vision of economies and ecologies that center humans and the natural world over the accumulation of material? We embody. We learn. We release the idea of failure because it's all data. But first, we imagine. We are in an imagination battle." Pause quote for a moment. Does such an imagination battle also not get rehearsed in stories like Batman and Joker? Return to quote. Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Renisha McBride and so many others are dead because in some white imagination they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who kill based on an imagined racialized fear of Black people are rarely held accountable. Imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of capability. I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. All of this imagining in the poverty of our current system is heightened because of potential cultural and economic innovators. This is a time travel exercise for the heart. This is collaborative ideation. What are the ideas that will liberate all of us? End quote. Before I became your Director of Religious Education for Children and Youth, I came and celebrated a Universalist All Souls with you. And I led you in a ritual of remembrance for the dead. I shared with you a reading from Hebrews, which has the line, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses." I said, these people, those we have named here and those we have lovingly remembered in silence, we welcome into the room with us. These are some of the folks in our great cloud of witnesses. But the text in Hebrews, I told you, is not about ancestors watching over us. It is not a metaphysical text. It is written for discouraged people, people losing hope. I shared with you that in the preceding chapter, this text begs the reader to remember Abel and Enoch and Noah, the prophets and women and their testimonies. When it references a great cloud of witnesses, it is saying, here are the people who have witnessed to what is most important, what is life-giving and hope-giving. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, now it is your time to witness. Today, I've invited you to write the names of the beloved dead on ribbons, which some of you have been tying, well, Suzanne, I guess, has been tying and braiding together during the service. If you're at home, I invite you to do the same with the materials available to you now or when it feels most appropriate. Now I invite Suzanne to come place these braided ribbons on the chancel table. The braiding of legacies can strengthen them. And we place this object here to remind us of those legacies we carry. As my colleague, Reverend Niñan Soto says, my ancestors are always with me, urging me to act like an ancestor. But this need not be joyless, difficult labor, but might instead be, if we heed the invitation, a joyful act of imagination, like Halloween, inviting us to ever embody new things, to try new ways of being, to tell new stories about who we are. This is not something for which there are no ways to get practice. Science fiction has long existed. Halloween has long been a holiday. So let us move into the work with the pleasure of an imagination we can beckon, of playfulness we can express, of creativity and the strength and love of the beloved deceased who have gone before us and are ever calling us into the world that still might be. So may it be, and may it be so.
We are approaching the end of our service today. If you would please join in with me and read the extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again.
Closing words from Barbara Piskin. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of, and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, to bow to the mystery. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be.
Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe in. When I breathe out, I breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in.
It is now the point in our service where we're going to move into our post-service breakout groups. For those of you attending in the Zoom session, you will be offered a chance to join other congregants to discuss topics covered in today's service, or it can be used as an opportunity to learn more about other people that you may not know. After about 15 minutes, the breakout rooms will close, and that will conclude our Sunday service for today.